Hello there. In my presentation on the GRE, I mentioned I did not study for the verbal section of that test. Today I'm going to explain why I didn't study for that section of the test and why I didn't have to. For why I didn't study for the verbal section of the GRE, it comes down to the fact that when I took my first practice test, the verbal reasoning section came back in the high 80th to low 90th percentile range, which was well above the minimum requirements for all of the schools I was applying to. Meanwhile, my quantitative reasoning section, the math section, came back in the 30th percentile range, which was well below the minimum requirements for all of the schools I was considering. So I decided to focus on the section where I could make the largest improvements. It also didn't hurt that schools often use GRE scores to screen out excess applications, and if you don't meet all of their GRE requirements, your application may not even be looked at, regardless of how good your letters of recommendation are or your CV is. And so that's why I devoted all of my study time on the GRE to the quantitative section. Now on to the second part. Why didn't I need to study for the verbal portion of the GRE? And ultimately, it comes down to the fact that the verbal section of the GRE is testing you on two things primarily. The first is word knowledge, and the second is reading comprehension. And I had been inadvertently studying these topics for the past decade by reading difficult books. Books by Leo Tolstoy, C.S. Lewis, James Edwards, Fyodor Dostoevsky, J.R.R. Tolkien, and many others that don't come to mind right now. Books that pushed me and challenged me, that caused me to look up all sorts of words that I didn't know, that caused me to have to reread sections until I understood what was going on, or gave up and had to go ask someone what the author was trying to say. By reading books that were just a little bit harder than I was capable of handling, I built the skills that are tested on the verbal section of the GRE. And so I had had years of practice figuring out what difficult sentences meant and learning all sorts of esoteric words that aren't used anymore. So what does this mean for you? This means that if you have time, not a decade probably, but if you have, say, 6 months or a couple years, or if you find this freshman year of college or senior year of high school and you're thinking about graduate school, you can start this now. You can start reading through difficult books. It don't have to be from the list of authors I named, though I would recommend those works, partially for studying those sections and those tested elements of the GRE, but also because I've enjoyed those works. I've enjoyed what I've gained from those works outside of just improving my vocabulary and reading comprehension. But essentially, it comes down to the fact that you need to pick books that are challenging for you. Regardless of where you are, find something that challenges you and employ those strategies. Figure out what the words are. Make sure that once you've looked them up, you write them down on a list and you keep it with you. One of the smartest men I know did that when he was a college student, and he would tell us a story in class about how every time he came across a new word, he would put it on a note along with the definition, and he'd carry that around. And every time he had spare time, he'd pull it out and look at the words. And then at the end of the week, he'd throw the list away and start a new one. I think that's a wonderful solution to increasing your vocabulary, where you have a running list of the words you don't know, but it never becomes so long that it becomes a pain to keep up with. Now, what if you're one of the people who doesn't have 6 months or a year or 4 years or a whole college career to learn how to function on this section of the GRE test? Well, then I think your best bet is to use flashcards to learn GRE vocabulary. And there are a whole bunch of lists out there. I'll leave it to you to find one that suits your fancy, because I haven't used them, so I can't judge them. All I can say is that the GRE tends to use old words, archaic words, ones that we don't see used very often. So focus on that type of word. And for the reading comprehension portion, I'd encourage you to take as many practice tests as you can. And once you've gone through it, you've scored it, you know how you stand, go through and read the reasons for the answer choices, especially for the reading comprehension questions. The Explanations can help a little bit on, say, the word matching or the what does this mean section, but it really helps on the comprehension section because it gives you an insight into how they're creating the questions, what they're looking for. And that is what I would do if I were on a limited time frame and I was looking to improve my verbal section of the GRE. Regardless of where you stand, I wish you the best in achieving the scores you need for your goals. And until next time, cheers.